Hello, and welcome to this next session of the marriage course, which is on the art of communication. And we'll be looking at how we can improve our understanding of each other and how we can learn to talk and listen more effectively.
A lack of conversation in marriage can get you into real trouble. We read this story in a local paper which went, "Heartfelt commiserations to pensioner Dorothy Naylor, whose recent day trip was spoilt when her husband Oliver left her on the forecourt of a petrol or filling station and drove for 2 hours before noticing that his wife wasn't in the car. I couldn't believe he'd gone without me," Mrs. Naylor told the Western Morning News. "I usually sit in the back because I can move around more, but we normally talk to one another." The couple, both in their 70s, had pulled into the petrol station to change a wheel. Mrs. Naylor's absence was noticed only when Mr. Naylor reached their destination and asked his wife, "Where do you want to get out, dear?" The article finished, Mr. and Mrs. Naylor had been married for 40 years.
We looked in the last session at how we come into marriage with many differences. And one of those may well be the different ways our families communicated as we were growing up.
Our families are really quite different because I'm half Spanish. My mother's Spanish, my father's English. So we have a very big kind of fiery Mediterranean influence, whereas Sarah's parents are both English and very kind of sort of reserved and quiet in a way, and that's good. But in terms of communication styles and how they come together, it's certainly made us have to learn how to relate to each other in a slightly different way.
So it's if you're having a meal in our family, it'll be quite quiet. I remember my grandmother was quite a formidable character, and she'd be quite strict about us all sort of not interrupting each other and, you know, not eating with our mouth full and being very polite. And some of that has obviously cascaded down through our family, and so everyone is sort of quite polite and waits for each other to speak before interrupting.
Whereas if you do that in my family, you don't get to speak at all because, you know, on family occasions there's like 8 of us and we're all eating and talking at the same time. Everyone's having their own conversation, no one's really listening, and you have to kind of jump in to get a word in edgeways.
And also it's half Spanish, half English in their conversation going on. So I've had to start to learn Spanish so I can keep up with it. And also learn that actually it's okay to sort of jump in if someone's talking, and that's all, you know, that's considered actually sort of polite, that you're interested, that you're showing interested if you interrupt or you know, give your, you know, put your words in.
Yeah, and I have to learn to be slightly more reserved and slightly quieter with Sarah's parents.
We asked people on the streets around the world why they think communication in relationships is so important. And here is what they said.
Communication either builds or destroys a relationship.
It is the most important thing in a marriage.
Communication is key.
For example, if I was to do something wrong and I didn't know that I'd done something wrong, I might do it again. And if that annoys my partner, then it's not what I want to do.
Well, if you're not communicating in a marriage, then something is broken down, hasn't it? You need to know where each other stands.
Communication is very important. Not too much communication, that's very important too. You can't deal with somebody who just can't shut up, and those types have nothing to say anyway.
Every individual has different emotions, different feelings, different wants, different needs. The only way for us to know what that is and what they are is through communication, talking to one another. So without communication, you can't have a relationship really.
Communication is important because you have to know what you're getting into before you get into it, and if you haven't put that across, it starts off going bad from the very beginning.
Sans communication, il n'y a pas de relation. Ça passe par le langage, ça passe par le regard, ça passe par partout.
Without communication, I think the relationship is dead.
When you have an argument with somebody, if you actually keep it inside you and don't communicate, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Quand on n'est pas d'accord, il faut le dire aussi. C'est là que c'est très intéressant. La bagarre peut aboutir à quelque chose de positif et non pas démolir. Je pense que c'est constructif de discuter. Donc un couple, c'est impossible qu'on soit toujours d'accord.
Communication is the number one advantage you have as a married couple because you can say anything. And it's also one of the big things that you have to do in order to keep waking up every day and being happy is being able to say anything and communicate with your partner.
So, As we've heard, communication is essential in marriage for all sorts of reasons, and not least because all of us have a longing deep inside to be known by another person, to be heard and understood. But that's not automatic in a marriage. Two people can be living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, yet if they don't communicate, they can be like strangers towards each other.
It's only when another person understands us that they're really with us. Communication draws us together at an emotional level. It enables us to connect.
Oh, I think it's absolutely vital to let another person know how you feel. Dan and I have been married for almost 36 years. You can't be married that long without going through tough times. And I remember we were shortly into our marriage and we were going through a tough time. And frankly, it seemed that love had almost died. And I remember cancelling engagement after engagement, and we spent long winter evenings listening to each other. And one night she said to me, "Darling, I think I might hate your mother." And I said, "You hate my mother? What do you mean you hate my mother?" She said, "Well, I don't really hate her," but she said, "I need to let you know how I feel about it, because, you know, Rob, you seem to always favour her." And suddenly all this came spilling out. And then I was to tell her how I felt. And it actually saved our marriage. One of my problems was I was pretty good with words. I'm a lawyer, and you think you win arguments, but you don't really. There's so much the other person wants to say, and often you need to give them space to say it. So I think it's absolutely vital. However you do it, whether you have to write a letter or say it or walk in the park, but it's desperately important to say, "This is how I feel."
This session, we want to look at what it means to communicate effectively in marriage. For any sort of communication, there are three parts. First, the message. Secondly, the person sending the message, that is the speaker. Thirdly, the person receiving the message, that is the listener.
It may be helpful to think about it in terms of radio communication. For that, you need first the programme, so that's the words or the music. Secondly, you need the transmitter, that could be the BBC, for example. Thirdly, the receiver, that is your radio. And both the receiver and the transmitter must be working properly without interference for effective communication.
And so it is in marriage. We must be good at transmitting and receiving. In other words, talking and listening. We'll go on to listening in a moment. But first, my favourite subject, talking. Have you ever stopped to think about what you actually talk about? If you're anything like Nikki and me, many of our conversations each day are about the mundane, practical details of life, such as who needs the car and what time we'll need to leave to get somewhere. That's why our marriage time is so important. Quality time that we've scheduled in when we can talk at a deeper level. And I know for myself that I only really feel connected to Nikki when we've had time to share our feelings with each other.
Some of you may be like me and find talking about feelings doesn't come naturally. This could be for various reasons. For some, their culture doesn't encourage them to talk about their own individual needs and longings. It may be that we've been taught to hide our feelings, or we simply find it hard to express them.
I, for one, definitely have traditionally been bad at vocalising my feelings. I usually just keep them bottled up, go quiet, sulky, sullen. Briley comes along, "What's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong? Prod, prod, prod. Tell me, tell me, tell me." And that just gets me even more annoyed. So what I've learned is to actually talk about my feelings, not just I think out loud all the time, but I don't think out loud with my feelings. So learning to vocalise the way I'm feeling and telling Briley where I'm at, it's made her calm down because she now knows where I am. And I just feel so much more at peace because I can share my feelings with somebody else. And they're able to support me, and I'm not on my own.
Your manual lists some other reasons why people find it difficult to say what they're feeling. Some think, "I don't want to disturb the peace by saying what I really feel." Or they may think, "Oh, it's just too complicated," or "I may be misunderstood." The marriage course is designed as a safe place to overcome these barriers and to practice expressing our feelings to our husband or wife.
Some people don't just find it difficult to express their emotions, they also find it hard to recognise what it is that they are feeling. But if that's you, change is possible.
We've put an optional exercise in the homework for those who find it hard to identify their emotions. It'll take courage to begin to articulate those feelings for those who aren't used to doing so. But we know many people who've changed dramatically and marriages that have become much closer as they've persisted.
If you're married to someone who struggles to verbalise their feelings, they're likely to feel exposed and vulnerable when they first start to do so. Be sure that you don't get angry and reject or blame them for what they reveal. You can help them by asking questions that encourage them to say what it is that's going on inside.
I am really bad at talking about feelings or really knowing why I'm upset. So I might get upset but not really understand why I'm upset. And David's very good at sort of asking me questions and listening to me.
Yeah, I'll have to sort of draw Sarah out and ask her, but what's really going on for you now? What are you really feeling at the moment? Why are you upset about this? Explain to me, and even if Sarah's not sure, she can at least try to put things together and see if she can work out, what's really going on in a certain situation.
And sometimes it can be helpful when I can't work out what my emotions are about something. And David can say, well, if that happened to me, I'd be really angry. Are you not feeling at all angry about that? And I'd go, ooh, maybe I'm a little cross. And then that helps me to sort of start to get in touch with some of those feelings around an issue.
Why don't you take a few minutes to look together at the diagram in your manual called Barriers to Talking, and tell each other if any of those barriers apply to you. For effective communication, talking is vital, but so too is listening. Often I think we take listening for granted, and that may be because we're not able to close our ears in the same way that we can close our mouth to stop us speaking or our eyes to prevent us seeing.
But we can become highly selective in what and who we listen to. If we don't listen to our husband or wife, they may shut down. They'll probably stop talking to us about their thoughts and feelings. We've discovered that listening is one of the most important skills to learn for a strong marriage. There's a great quote from the Bible which says, "Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry."
Stephen Covey, author of the book The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, writes, "If I were to summarize in one sentence the single most important principle I have learned in the field of interpersonal relations, it would be this: seek first to understand and then to be understood." We only understand our husband or wife when we really listen to them.
The amazing thing about marriage is that we have it in our power to make our partner feel loved and valued just by listening to them. But often, it's the people we're closest to that we find it hardest to listen to.
For me, communication with James had really slipped. We weren't listening to each other. He would speak and I'd be cooking and I'd turn my back on him and, do things at the sink or whatever, and just realized how much more effort I might put into it for a stranger or a friend where I'm really listening. But I had put such filters on my ears because we've been together 32 years. So it's like, I already know what he's going to say. I would think, and I would say, oh, well, I know where this is going. And I'd half tune out and continue. And it'd become a habit. And later, sometimes he'd catch me on it. He'd say, well, do you remember I told you this? And I didn't remember. It was a big red flag. So this really, the marriage course taught us to really listen to each other.
Actually, there's no one who's more important to listen to than our husband or wife.
We want you now to spend a few minutes thinking about the effect of being a good listener. Please look at the exercise in your manual entitled The Power of Listening and discuss together the questions that are listed there.
I imagine that in answer to that first question about what it feels like when we're listened to, you probably came up with things like, I feel valued, I feel confident, I feel supported.
When I get June's full attention, I feel I'm the man. I feel I can do anything I want to do because she's affirming that what I say is important, and she's also affirming that I'm a nice guy, you know, I'm good to hang out with. So for me, it just builds my confidence 110%, you know.
Yeah, when I get Eric's full attention, I feel really loved, really, really loved. Because early on in our marriage, I used to spend a lot of time at the computer, come in from work and then go on the computer, and I just feel like I must be the pits because, you know, an electronic machine is more desirable than me. But as we learnt and he gives me his full attention, I feel really loved and, yeah, I feel good.
Whereas when we're not listened to, we're likely to feel frustrated, taken for granted, unloved, unsupported. And some would go as far as to say they feel rejected or misunderstood.
I can't function if I've been misunderstood or if I'm half understood. And it feels very good, very safe, I feel very affirmed. And I feel able to have a proper discussion about something when I've been heard. I don't mind if we don't agree, but I just need to know that I have been heard. I get very upset if I'm not.
We want to look now at what can get in the way of us being good listeners. The first is what are called filters. And we've put a diagram of these in your manual. And what happens is, when someone is speaking, our own strong feelings, memories, prejudices, attitudes, and so on, affect what we hear. And these can act like filters over our ears. Now, we all have filters, but often we're not aware of them.
If we don't make an effort to listen properly, there can be something else going on in our head distracting us while our husband or wife is talking to us. As a result, we miss what they're really saying.
Sam's a musician, and sometimes we'll be laying in bed and we'll be talking at night, and I'll be talking away, as I do, and all of a sudden, like, the bed's moving to a beat, and he's playing a song in his head, and he's using his hands and his feet to drum along to it. And I say to him, what are you doing? And he's like, what do you mean? And he's actually doing a full orchestra in the bed while I'm trying to download my day to him. So it doesn't even have to be computers or televisions that are distracting.
It could be not concentrating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's look a bit more at how these filters work. Take memories, for example. Sometimes when someone is speaking to us, what they say will trigger a memory of our own, perhaps of another conversation or a past event. As we recall this memory, we can become distracted and stop really listening to what's being said. Nikki was talking to me recently about our daughter who's expecting her first baby.
She and her husband have to move house before the baby's born. I was suggesting we went to help them move and was looking for a suitable day. I suddenly realised Scilla wasn't really listening to me.
And I wasn't. I'd gone off into a world of my own, and I was thinking about when I was pregnant with our daughter and we had to move house. And I hadn't taken in a word of what Nikki was saying because of my own vivid memories that came flooding back. And I had to ask him to start again.
Another filter may be our attitudes. If I say the word mother-in-law, it will provoke different responses from each of us. For some, it will be a pleasant association. For others, it may be a bit more complicated. Our attitude on a whole range of issues can stop us listening properly to what the other person is saying.
I laughed when I heard Nikki and Scilla on the marriage course talk about filters and things that distract you from listening properly, because whenever I talk to David about going anywhere on holiday or on travel trips, I sort of notice that he's not listening, particularly if it involves a plane trip.
Because the problem is I'm not very good with flying. I've certainly got better, but I don't really like it. So if I can possibly choose another way of transport, then I will. And whenever Sarah mentions planes, I'm already thinking, can I get there by train? Is there a boat that we can do it? Can we postpone the trip? Can we do something else? And by that time, Sarah's on to hotels and where we're going to stay. And I'm thinking, can we have an extra 3 days before to get there and 3 days back?
So I might not even have got, it might be something completely different where I'm just happen to be talking about possibly going to someone's wedding and they happen to live in America, and he's not listening to anything about the wedding or the discussion. He's just wondering how long it takes in a boat to get to New York.
Another filter could be a prejudice. Very often we don't recognise we have them or that they're affecting the way that we listen to each other. We may have a prejudice about gender. So if a wife starts talking about sport, some husbands think that as a woman, she doesn't know what she's talking about, and they switch off. We may have other prejudices. If we grew up in very different cultures, or we may be strongly influenced by our parents' particular way of doing things. Prejudices prevent us listening in an open way to our partner.
Our physical environment can also act as a filter. Our surroundings can distract us from listening properly.
For me, listening to Jill was a bad habit that I was not doing. I was not listening to her well. I was looking at the laptop, I was looking at TV, I was reading, so I wasn't paying any attention to really what Jill was saying. And the marriage course really taught me that I do need to pay attention to what she's saying. I do need to look at her in the eye and see her.
For me, if we're clearing up in the kitchen and Nicky starts an important conversation, I just can't really listen to what he's saying. I'm hopeless at multitasking, especially if one of those tasks is listening. And the state of the kitchen is just too strong a filter for me to be able to concentrate on what Nicky's saying. So I need to say to him, can we finish the washing up and then talk about whatever it is?
Or finally, a lack of interest. Not being interested in what the other person is saying will act as a filter. That can become a real issue between a husband and wife if we're involved in quite different work or other activities during the day.
Sometimes I've found it quite difficult talking about my day. When Dave comes home from work and he's had an exciting time doing all these different things in business, and he'll say, "And how's your day?" And my day seems quite mundane, and I wouldn't say my day is boring at all, because I love being at home with the children. I absolutely adore being a mum, but it doesn't seem quite as glamorous as Dave's. So I think very early on, when all the children were little, I found that quite hard to communicate to Dave. Actually, do you really want to know what my day's like? Because actually we went to toddler group and then we went swimming and had coffee with, and that didn't seem quite as exciting for me to tell him. But Dave's always been really great at saying, "Joe, your day is actually really important to me."
It takes generosity to listen and be interested in each other's world. But deciding to show interest will positively affect the way that we listen. All those filters that we've mentioned create interference. It's a bit like not finding the exact frequency of a radio station. You can sort of hear the voice in the background, but there's a lot of noise and crackle.
If we're not aware of these filters, we can be having a conversation with our husband or wife and fail to hear what they're actually saying because of that separate conversation going on in our mind. Effective communication involves recognizing and putting aside these filters.
The second thing that stops us being a good listener is bad habits. And we want to look at 5. It's worth recognizing that most of us fall into at least one of them, and some of us fall into a lot more. Nicky and I have worked out that between us, we're guilty of all 5, and I have to admit that I own up to 4 of them.
The first bad habit is reassuring, which is my principal one. If Zillah's telling me something she's worried about, my tendency is to tell her not to worry about it, that it's going to be okay. Often the reassurer wants to be cheerful and positive about everything. But when we do this, it doesn't allow our partner to express disappointment, hurt, or any other negative feelings.
I think when it comes to listening, I'm definitely a reassurer. When Jill is explaining a situation, perhaps at school, where things have been a bit pressured, I find myself saying, oh, it'll be all right, before I've even heard the full story. And that means really I block Jill out from expressing what she really wants to say. So I've learnt that reassuring isn't the best tactic for listening.
Yes, it doesn't really solve a problem when I'm actually really just wanting to talk about it and be listened to and not have anything solved.
I'm a business analyst, so treating Jill as a problem to solve, I've learnt, is not the best approach.
The second bad habit is giving advice. An advice giver always wants to give a solution to the problem. But the trouble is that the speaker, more often than not, just wants to be heard and understood, not fixed.
I'm definitely an advice giver, and it's my natural default. It's just something that I automatically do, and I've realised with Taryn that's not the best thing. Often she'll just come to me and talk to me about something which I automatically think, oh, solution, here we go, and that doesn't work at all well.
But since we've identified that Mark loves to give advice and that's not what I'm looking for, things have been so much better. I'm more open to telling him about things because I know that he's just going to give the right response now. But it meant having to say to him, please don't give advice, that's not what I need, I just want you to give me a hug or say it's okay, we're in this together. And so it seems a bit mechanical at first and you've got to practice, but it's definitely had the right impact. And
what Taryn will do now is, because she knows that I'm just so rigged that way, she'll say, I'm just telling this to you, and I don't want you to sort of like try and problem solve it or find a solution. I'm just wanting to tell you this. So then that makes me understand, okay, switch that one off and just listen and understand.
And then we're both happy.
Yeah.
The third bad habit is intellectualizing. This is when the listener is always trying to find an explanation. If you tell an intellectualizer, I'm very worried about my mother, she's getting very forgetful these days, their answer could well be a long lecture on how it's probably Alzheimer's disease, or could be senile dementia, and then an explanation as to the difference, followed by rushing off to check the internet to download some more information about them. The problem with intellectualizers is they aren't listening for what the speaker is feeling.
The fourth bad habit is going off on a tangent. You're just telling someone about something that's happened to you, but before you get to the best bit, they say, oh, that's just like what happened to me last week. Or, oh, that reminds me of when. And away they go on their own agenda. And you never get the chance to finish your story. They've totally hijacked the conversation.
The fifth and probably most common bad habit is interrupting. If you're talking to an interrupter, you can't afford to draw breath or to pause to think. If you do, they're in there and you've lost your chance.
I'd say that I'm a bad interrupter. I'd say that I'm even a serial interrupter. And I'd say I've also got another bad habit, which is I just sit there and wait for Deb to stop talking before I can just jump in again and interrupt her that way.
So, in conclusion, all 5 of these habits prevent the speaker from saying what they're feeling. And if that goes on happening, the speaker then starts to shut down and give up and says to themselves, what's the point?
These bad habits stop us from communicating well with one another. It's worth asking ourselves, do I have one or more of them?
I'm a professional interrupter and solver of Jill's problems even before she's said them fully. And the communication, the evening focusing on communication, helped me to realise that there were some simple ways of just effective listening. And it meant being less of an interrupter and less of a problem solver, more of a listener.
And I realised I'd actually got to speak as well when I'd got the space to do so. So it was really good.
Why don't you take a few moments now to identify what your particular bad habit is? If you're finding it difficult to recognise your own weakness or you're not sure, you could check with your husband or wife. They just may have a better idea.
I hope very much that what your partner has told you hasn't come as too much of a shock. Sometimes these bad habits have got to the stage where we don't even realise we have them.
It's only when we recognise our bad habits that we can then start to change. We can all learn the art of effective listening, but it takes time, effort and practice, and the best training ground is marriage itself.
In this next exercise, we want one of you to spend 1 minute telling your husband or wife a happy memory of something that happened to you before you met each other. As you're talking, be sure to express your feelings about the memory. Then, the listener should summarise what they've heard, particularly describing the feelings that have been expressed, to show that they were listening. Then, swap roles.
Some of you may have found it hard to listen, but we want to assure you that you won't be the only ones.
One of the examples on the course, on the marriage course, was to listen to each other. And I'm a natural interrupter. And Sam had to say something. The part that he had to do was he had to speak about something, and then I had to listen, and then I had to repeat what he had said. And unfortunately, I couldn't even let him tell me what it was he needed to say without me interrupting him. So
she sat there with her hand over her mouth to help the situation. It did help because she was quiet for a whole few minutes. So
thanks. So that's what we've learnt, that I actually need, it's something that I haven't been good at. He's been brilliant at it, and that I need to, I was going to say, just close my mouth and cover it up and take some time to listen to what he has to say. And it's made a real difference to our marriage. It's two of us in this together rather than just me talking all the time.
In a moment, Scylla and I are going to have a go at modelling effective listening for you. Scylla's going to tell me about an issue that she's feeling concerned about, and I have no idea what it is. So this is completely unrehearsed. But before we do that, we're going to look briefly at the 5 steps for effective listening, which I'll try to use. You may want to follow the 5 steps in the manual as we go through them.
The first step is to pay attention and not interrupt. Recent research has shown that the average individual listens for only 17 seconds before interrupting. And our body language also speaks volumes. Turn to face your husband or wife and keep looking at their face to show you're listening, even if they look away while they're talking. Don't do anything else at the same time. If they're upset, showing that we're listening may mean putting an arm around them or taking their hand.
The second step is to try to put yourself in your partner's shoes. Our husband or wife may be struggling to express themselves. They may not be used to doing so, or may only be working out their feelings as they talk. Don't rush them, and don't be afraid of silences.
The third step is to acknowledge their feelings. When you've listened to what your partner wants to say, reflect back what they've said. That is, say back to them the main points of what you've heard, especially any feelings that they've expressed. At this stage, you're not agreeing or disagreeing or giving your own opinion. Your turn will come later.
Reflecting back like this helps us to find out if we've really understood what our partner has told us. And it helps them know if they've been understood. It'll probably feel awkward or contrived at first because we want to say what we think. We want to give our side of the story. But it makes a big difference, and it's very powerful in a marriage. A husband or wife feels they're not alone. We've entered their world and are showing that we care.
The session on communication was really good, partly because Lise had to listen to me expressing how I felt, which doesn't happen all that often.
Yeah, I talk a lot. So it was when we did an exercise where basically it was David's turn to talk, and I really wasn't allowed to interrupt or say anything, and I found that quite hard. And at the end, David he couldn't say enough how much that meant to him and how amazing he felt having me listen to him And I was shocked, actually, that he felt so strongly and made me realise how I don't do it enough. So I'm trying harder.
That's really important.
Yeah.
The fourth step is to ask our partner, what's the most important part of what you've been saying? This helps them to focus. Wait quietly while they think about what they want to say. And when they've spoken, reflect back again what you've heard. People often talk around an issue that really matters to them. Asking the right questions enables deep conversation.
The fifth step is to help them work out what they might do. Rather than giving advice or telling our husband or wife what we think they should do, it's 100 times more powerful if we help them work out for themselves how to solve their issue and draw out their ideas of what they'd like to do about the situation.
It may be that we don't need to do anything. Talking it out is enough. Finally, ask, is there anything more that you'd like to say? Don't assume that you know everything. Give your partner time and space to talk.
In a little while, we'll ask you to practice those 5 steps. But first, we're going to try to give you an example of what effective listening looks like and sounds like. To remind us whose issue is being discussed, the person whose issue it is holds something. We're going to use this table napkin.
Thank you. And it's my issue we're going to focus on, so I get to hold it.
And my role is to listen and to respond appropriately. So, here goes.
I just want to fill you in on something that's important, so before I talk to Nikki about the issue. We had to postpone a short holiday at Easter that we were meant to be going on, and we talked about reorganising it for the end of May, and we were going to go and stay in this small little hotel in the countryside that our daughter and son-in-law had recommended to us.
So, my darling, what is the issue that you want to talk about?
Well, the issue is about our holiday at the end of May when we're going to go to that great little hotel that Kirsty and Rick recommended to us. And I've been so looking forward to that time, and particularly looking forward to it because, A, they showed us such great photos and how nice it looks, but also because we've been so busy, and I just have been really excited at you and I having time on our own for 3 or 4 days. And then at the weekend, I just thought I'd check with you that you had actually booked it. And so I kind of tentatively said, oh, you have booked the hotel, haven't you? And because I didn't want to nag you about it, and you know, that sort of thing. And then actually you told me you hadn't. And do you know, I was really upset. And actually I realised I was much more upset than I'd realised. And I think there were 2 reasons for that. The first one was that I really thought you'd done it. Because we had that great conversation, we talked all about it. You said, yes, you checked, they'd got spare rooms, and I knew there were only 6 rooms, and I thought, great, he'll book it straight away. And that was that. So that was the first reason that you hadn't done it. And then the second reason is that, you know, going away for 4 days with just you is so special to me. Just that time on our own together. And, you know, I'd been looking forward to it so much. And suddenly the whole thing was sort of going pear-shaped. And I kind of thought, well, I'm just really upset. I'm really disappointed because we might not go. And in fact, I felt really let down by you.
So, let me see if I've understood. It was about when we're going away at the end of May and going away to stay in that little hotel, and you have been really looking forward to going. And then at the weekend, when you discovered I hadn't quite managed to book the hotel, you were really upset. And you were upset because we'd been so busy and because you've been really looking forward to it. And I think that, did you say the second reason was because just going away on our own for 4 days means so much to you? Is that it?
Something else I didn't say is that it also is so special when you've kind of organised it and you've done it all, because that's like a sort of real treat for me. And I kind of hoped that you had done it, but then I was really upset when you hadn't actually.
So your disappointment was because it's very special when I organise it, and you were very upset when you found that I hadn't.
Yeah.
So what's the most important part of what you've been saying?
Well, just that those times when you say that you're going to do something, and then I don't want to nag you, but I really want to be able to know that you will do it, because otherwise I just sort of think, well, OK, I could have done it. But then it would have been different, because it's so great when you do it.
Yeah. So the most important thing is that I said that I would do it, and you don't want to nag me, but then you find that I haven't done it. You thought you could have done it yourself, and it sort of loses part of the specialness of the treat. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Well, is there anything you'd like to do or like me to do about what you just said?
Well, I still don't know the answer as to whether we have actually got a place, but whether we have or haven't got a place in that little hotel, I would still really love to go to somewhere in that area, and I'm sure you can find somewhere. So I'd just love it if you organised it.
So
Rather
really, what you'd like is for me to organise it, whether or not we can still get into that hotel, for me to organise it.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, just to say that I'm so looking forward to our time away.
Well, that was really helpful.
But don't worry, I'm going to give Nicky a chance to tell me his point of view after this session.
And we'll let you know how it goes. Now it's your turn for the exercise, effective listening, that you'll see in your manual. Each of you take an issue that's upsetting you or bothering you that you've not discussed recently. And our suggestion for this first time is not to choose an issue that's been causing a lot of conflict or disagreement between you. Follow the guidelines in that exercise, effective listening, with the listener reflecting back and asking those same questions that I asked Scylla. You'll see them in the manual. And the speaker holding something. You could use a table napkin or a pen or something else. Then switch roles so each of you has an opportunity to speak and to listen.
Doing that exercise for some of you may have been extremely difficult. You found it hard just to listen. And we want to encourage you that with practice, it really does get easier. And there'll be lots more opportunity to practice during the rest of the course.
I think for both of us, the session on communication was probably the most meaningful session out of the whole marriage course.
Yeah.
We thought we were pretty good at it to start with, but then realised that we had a lot of blind spots that we weren't aware of. So it was fantastic.
And I think at first learning to listen to each other was a mechanical kind of thing we had to practice, but we really can say a year and a bit down the line that it's happening naturally and our communication is more clear, we have a better understanding of each other.
Some of you may have found it difficult to articulate your feelings. Deep communication requires us to be open about our inner selves and to make ourselves vulnerable to each other. If we fail to communicate painful or complex emotions and try to cope on our own, we can easily start to drift apart. It's time now to hear from Richard and Zoe, our feature couple for this session.
We came on the marriage course because we had been separated for 8 months.
When Zoe called me up and said, would I be prepared to go along to a marriage course, I thought that I really owed it to her, to our daughter and to our relationship to give it one last attempt.
Shortly before Christmas, a leaflet came through the door about the marriage course, and I opened it and read it, and one of the testimonies inside was headed towards the divorce lawyer, so I thought, well, that's me, let's have a read. So I read through, and the couple went on the marriage course and then were very happy again and didn't get divorced. So I thought, well, if it can work for them, it can work for me. So I asked Richard whether he would want to go on the course, and he said yes. So having been apart for 8 months, we hadn't really spoken to each other about our feelings. We hadn't spoken about anything other than quite functional things to do with childcare or finances.
I was quite apprehensive and nervous. I didn't really want to go.
I was incredibly nervous because Richard isn't the kind of person who likes to talk very much, and I pictured us being really isolated and not saying anything.
I'm not the sort of person that enjoys talking about my feelings at the best of times, so to do it in a room full of other people was quite a daunting prospect.
I was so surprised because it was like someone had opened Richard's mouth and he just talked and we just talked, and it was really good.
At the end of the evening of that first night, we made an arrangement to meet up the following evening to go through the exercises and homework that we'd been set on the course.
So Richard came over to my house and we had a meal together, and we just sat down and let the evening develop.
And we just chatted and we talked for ages and ages and ages.
We didn't move for probably 3-4 hours just chatting, and it felt really good just to be talking again and to kind of relive how we had felt when we first got together. When we first got back together, we decided that we wouldn't tell anyone for a few months just to keep the pressure off.
Before we went on the marriage course, our communication as a couple was quite poor. Neither of us were particularly good at expressing how we felt, especially myself.
I used to shy away from conflict a lot. I would never bring up any issues that we had and would always bury them deep down, which caused problems between us. I was also very bad at listening.
And we both were also not particularly good listeners.
And finish sentences.
We would always be butting in with some helpful piece of advice.
I used to interrupt a lot.
Rather than actually just listening to what it was that the other person wanted to say.
I found it quite hard to make him understand what I was trying to say and to look at things from my perspective.
By listening properly and by being able to repeat back to her what she said, it helps her to realise that I have been listening properly, that I've understood what she's saying, and because of that she feels much more valued.
While we were apart, I really hoped that we would get back together, and I knew that if we could work at our relationship that it would be okay. And going on the marriage course has really helped because it's given us a good set of tools and techniques that we can use to build a really good relationship.
Before we went on the marriage course, there really was no future for our relationship. But now we're back together, and with our daughter, we can build a strong family life and look forward to the future together.
For the homework, we've included an exercise called How Good Is Your Communication? And we want you to identify areas that you're good at talking about and those that you're not so good at talking about or tend to avoid. Then we suggest that you take one of those areas that you haven't discussed at any depth and use the same processes as you've been doing this session. One of you hold the table napkin or whatever you've decided to use. The other one follow the 5 steps for effective listening.
Many couples have talked about the need to relearn the art of conversation as a couple. And in order to do that, it's essential that we spend quality time together on a regular basis.
When our children were sort of at their teenage stage and old enough to be left on their own, really, we used to have a time when you came back from work and we'd shut ourselves in the kitchen for a good half hour while you unloaded and I unloaded and we talked about our day.
Yeah.
So it was, and they weren't allowed anywhere near us.
Because we found that unless we gave ourselves that time at the beginning of the evening, just either the kind of run over from the office or all that's going on at home, if there's 4 of them there with friends or whatever, we wouldn't give each other the time that we needed. And something that we have found throughout our marriage, and what we call it tuning in, is that unless we're well tuned into each other, then misunderstandings arise and so on. And that was our key time.
Our weekly marriage time has also been so important for us to communicate with each other regularly.
We'd encourage you to look in your diaries or calendars before you go home. Find a time that suits you both between now and the next session to put in some marriage time.
I'm going to finish this session with a prayer. So please stay as you are. Lord, thank you that you're a God who communicates with us. Thank you that we can pour out our hearts to you and that you're always listening to us. Please help us to be good at expressing our feelings and listening to each other, so that we may grow in our understanding and support of one another. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, that's all for this session, and we hope that you've done some helpful talking and listening.
We look forward to you joining us again for the next session. Goodbye.
Goodbye.